A lone fire burns against the night, and beyond its glow the ancient hills keep their silence. Welcome, my friend. I'm John, and I'm glad you've chosen to walk this road with me. There are places in Middle-earth where the wind remembers names long forgotten, and old shadows still linger beneath broken stone. Draw a little closer to the warmth, listen well, and let us follow a trail that begins where the darkness seems deepest. The long years of the First Age drew toward their end, beneath a sky that had forgotten peace. Across the northern reaches of Beleriand, smoke drifted from broken hills, where the fires of Angband stained the clouds with a dull crimson glow. Villages that had once stood beneath beech and oak had become empty clearings filled with blackened stone, and the roads between them belonged to wolves and orc patrols. Few still believed that Morgoth could ever be overthrown, for every defeat had only deepened his shadow, and every passing season seemed to strengthen his armies. Yet beyond the western sea, unseen by those who suffered in Middle-earth, a mighty host was gathering, and with it came the first hope that many generations had never lived to witness. Among the hidden havens that still endured stood the grey havens upon the Isle of Balar, where the shipwright Círdan watched the western horizon with patient eyes. His people labored without complaint, repairing ships, forging arrowheads, and storing food against a war that all knew must soon arrive. The sea carried strange winds, unlike any that had blown in years, and the oldest mariners whispered that the breath of Aman itself had reached the shores. No trumpet announced the change, and no blazing sign crossed the heavens, but those who had lived long enough to remember brighter days felt it in their hearts. They spoke little of their hope, for hope declared too early had often become another grief. Not far from the harbour, where the pine woods climbed gentle slopes above the sea, an elf walked alone beneath the evening branches. His cloak was grey enough to vanish among the trunks, and the ash wood of his bow had been polished by many years of hard use rather than careful display. Few knew his true name now, for among elves and men alike he had long been called only the Grey Hunter. He had wandered across nearly every surviving corner of Beleriand, guiding refugees, hunting orc scouts, and slipping unseen through lands where even companies of warriors dared not march. His face bore neither pride nor bitterness, only the quiet weariness of one who had buried too many companions and learned that survival often depended upon silence. The forest greeted him with familiar sounds that many would never notice. A squirrel paused halfway up a pine trunk before disappearing into its branches, while gulls circled above the distant surf with sharp cries, carried inland by the wind. The hunter knelt beside a patch of soft earth where hoof prints crossed the path, studying them with calm attention before brushing the disturbed soil smooth again. The tracks belonged to deer, but another set lay beneath them, older and heavier, made by boots nailed with crude iron. Orcs had crossed this place 2 nights before, moving westward in small numbers. They had not found the hidden trails, yet their search was slowly widening. He returned to the havens after sunset, without announcing himself, passing unnoticed through familiar watchposts where the sentries recognized his step before his face. Fires burned low between the wooden halls, and the smell of roasted fish mixed with salt carried inland from the shore. Children still played among overturned boats while their elders worked through the fading light, pretending that ordinary tasks could hold fear at bay. The Grey Hunter paused only long enough to accept a loaf of fresh bread from an elderly woman who had once fled the ruins of the Farlas decades before. She smiled without asking where he had been, and he thanked her with equal restraint, for some friendships no longer required words. A messenger approached through the gathering dusk with measured haste, neither running nor delaying, and bowed his head before speaking. "The Lord Chéardan asks for you. He waits in the western tower." The Grey Hunter studied the elf's face and saw no alarm there, only unusual gravity, which unsettled him more than panic would have done. Chéardan did not summon his rangers lightly, and never without purpose. As he followed the winding stair that climbed above the harbour, he found himself wondering whether another hidden refuge had fallen, or whether some greater change had finally reached the shores. The chamber overlooked the sea through broad windows left open to the cool night air. Chéardan stood beside them, with both hands resting upon the stone sill, his ancient beard stirring gently in the wind as moonlight silvered the waves below. Beside him waited two mariners clad in travel-worn cloaks, their boots still wet with seawater, and neither spoke until the Grey Hunter entered. The shipwright turned at last, and although his face remained calm, his eyes carried a brightness that had not been seen there for many years. "The West has answered," he said quietly. "The host of Valinor has crossed the sea." For a long moment, no one moved. The words settled into the room like the first drops of rain after a season of drought, almost too precious to believe. The Grey Hunter had heard tales of the Blessed Realm since childhood, yet those stories belonged to another age, spoken around campfires while kingdoms still stood. Now they had become living truth. "Then the war begins," he answered, and even to his own ears his voice sounded lower than before. Chéardan inclined his head, but the joy that briefly touched his expression soon faded beneath harder concerns. He spread a weathered map across a heavy oak table, holding its corners flat with smooth stones gathered from the shore. Rivers, mountain passes, ruined fortresses, and forgotten roads stretched across the faded parchment, each marked by careful hands over many years of bitter struggle. "Victory is no certainty," he said. "Morgoth has ruled through fear, but he has never ruled through foolishness. Even now his servants are moving before our allies have set foot upon these shores." One of the mariners reached inside his cloak and produced a leather pouch sealed with blue wax. He opened it carefully, revealing several scraps of parchment covered with hurried elvish writing. These had come from scouts watching the northern coast, where strange movements had already been seen beyond the outer patrols. Small companies of orcs were leaving Angband instead of gathering within its walls. They traveled separately, avoided open roads, and disappeared into old valleys abandoned long ago. Such movements did not resemble retreat. They resembled preparation. The Grey Hunter leaned over the map while his fingers rested lightly upon the northern highlands. His eyes followed forgotten passes between broken ridges until they stopped beneath the shadow of Thangorodrim itself. "Messengers," he murmured. "Not soldiers." Chéardan met his gaze at once, recognizing that the same conclusion had come to them both. If Morgoth's captains were sending orders before the great invasion began, hidden strongholds scattered across Beleriand would awaken together, like embers stirred back into flame. Silence returned to the chamber, while the surf broke steadily against the rocks below. Far across the dark sea, invisible beyond the horizon, the armies of the West were drawing nearer with every passing hour. The Grey Hunter rested one hand upon the worn grip of his knife, not from fear, but from habit formed over centuries of dangerous roads. He understood without further explanation that whatever task awaited him would not be fought in open battle beside shining banners. It would begin alone, upon forgotten trails where no songs would ever be sung, and where one unseen traveler might decide the fate of thousands before the first great trumpet of the War of Wrath was ever heard. Dawn arrived beneath a ceiling of pale cloud that turned the sea to cold silver, and the harbor awoke before the first gulls cried above the waves. Smiths hammered spearheads upon anvils worn smooth by generations of use, while sailors carried coils of rope and sealed barrels toward ships that would soon cross waters no mariner had dared to sail for many years. The Grey Hunter watched the labor from the tower steps, noticing how every face held the same quiet determination. There was no shouting, no celebration, and no boast of coming victory. Those who had survived the ruin of kingdoms had learned that hope was strongest when spoken softly. Círdan summoned him again before the morning meal, this time to a smaller chamber, deep within the western tower, where no idle footsteps ever wandered. The room held little beyond a broad table, several oil lamps, and shelves crowded with weathered maps whose edges had curled from long years beside the sea. Waiting there were only the shipwright and an elderly elf whose cloak bore neither badge nor ornament. His sharp eyes lingered upon the Grey Hunter for a moment before he bowed with restrained courtesy. "This is Hallis," Círdan said. "For 40 years he has gathered word from every surviving refuge between the mouths of Sirion and the foothills of Ered-Wethrin." Hallis unfolded another map, this one marked not with kingdoms, but with narrow paths, abandoned watchtowers, hidden caves, and forgotten crossings over streams that no army would ever notice. He placed a finger upon a valley north of the river Narog, where the ink had nearly faded with age. 3 nights ago, he began, our scouts followed an orc captain traveling with only 12 guards. They expected him to join another patrol, yet instead he entered these hills and disappeared. He tapped the parchment again, more firmly this time. There are no settlements there now, only ruins left from older wars. The Grey Hunter studied the valley in silence, while memory stirred behind his calm expression. He had passed through those hills decades before, when the forests still hid abandoned halls built by the Noldor during brighter years. Most had collapsed beneath neglect or orc raids, but some lay buried beneath earth and tangled roots where only careful eyes could find them. Secret places survived long after those who built them were gone. Morgoth understood that, as well as any elf still living. "Someone waits there," the hunter said at last. "Not to defend it, but to receive orders." Círdan folded his hands behind his back and began pacing slowly across the chamber. "Our greatest fear is not Angband itself," he admitted. "The host of the West possesses strength beyond anything Morgoth expects. Yet hidden companies scattered across Beleriand could strike supply lines, attack refugees, and force our allies to divide their strength before the siege is complete." He stopped beside the narrow window overlooking the sea. "If those messengers complete their journey, the war may last years instead of months, and every extra season will fill the land with more death." The Grey Hunter felt the familiar weight of duty settle upon him without surprise. Great battles belonged to princes, captains, and heroes whose names would endure in songs. His own road had always been narrower, leading through lonely forests, where success was measured by dangers that never came to pass. There was little glory in hunting a single rider through wilderness while armies marched elsewhere. Yet he had seen enough wars to know that kingdoms often stood or fell because one unseen scout arrived before another. Hallis reached beneath the table and produced an object wrapped carefully in coarse linen. When he unfolded the cloth, an orc helmet emerged, its iron dented by many blows and streaked with dried blood. Across its brow someone had carved a narrow mark, unlike any sign commonly used by Morgoth's armies. The symbol resembled 3 crooked claws enclosing a single black circle. "Have you seen this before?" Hallis asked quietly. The Grey Hunter lifted the helmet and turned it toward the lamplight, tracing the scarred mark with one thumb. At first it stirred nothing, but then an old memory surfaced from years long buried beneath newer griefs. He remembered creeping through rain-soaked pines after the fall of Doriath, where dead orcs had lain scattered beside a stream. One captain had worn this same strange device upon his shield, though the hunter had thought little of it then. "Not a legion," he murmured. "A company chosen for special tasks." He returned the helmet gently to the table. Messengers, scouts, assassins. Círdan exchanged a brief glance with Hallis before speaking again. "Our watchers have counted at least 4 such captains leaving Angband during the last fortnight. They travel separately, and each takes a different road." His voice remained steady, but the concern beneath it was plain. "We cannot spare enough rangers to pursue them all. The host of Valinor must soon land, and every coast watcher is needed." The Grey Hunter already knew what would follow, yet he waited without interruption. "You will hunt the northern messenger. Of all the roads, his appears the most dangerous." The hunter nodded once, accepting the charge without ceremony. He asked no question about reward, nor whether others would accompany him, because both answers were already obvious. Solitary travel left fewer tracks, required less food, and drew less notice from the enemy. Even among elves, there were few who could move across hostile country with the patience such work demanded. "If I find him," he said, "do I return with the message, or do I ensure it is never delivered?" Círdan met his eyes without hesitation. The message must not reach its destination, whatever the cost. The meeting ended shortly thereafter, and the Grey Hunter spent the remaining hours preparing with deliberate care. He sharpened his hunting knife until its edge caught the light like still water, and tested the string of his bow with practiced fingers. His quiver held 36 arrows, each fletched with grey goose feathers chosen to fly true even in hard wind. He packed dried venison, oat bread, a small kettle blackened by countless fires, flint, spare bowstring, and a tightly rolled blanket. There was nothing else he required, for years upon the wild roads had taught him the difference between necessity and burden. Before noon, he walked once more through the havens, committing familiar sights to memory without meaning to do so. Children laughed while chasing one another between stacked timbers, unaware that the fate of the age balanced upon events far beyond their understanding. Fishermen mended nets beside the docks, pausing only to glance toward the western horizon, where ships from Ammon would soon appear. An old mariner raised one weathered hand in greeting, and the hunter returned the gesture with a faint smile. Such ordinary moments possessed a quiet strength that no fortress of Morgoth had ever managed to destroy. As the sun climbed above the sea, the Grey Hunter crossed the last bridge leading away from the Isle of Balar and entered the forests of southern Beleriand once more. Behind him, the cries of gulls gradually faded until only wind stirred through pine needles overhead. Ahead stretched many days of lonely travel toward lands where every ruined tower might conceal enemies, and every silent valley might hide the purpose of Morgoth's secret messengers. He neither hurried nor delayed, setting his pace with the steady rhythm that could carry him from dawn until darkness without wasting strength. Somewhere beyond the northern woods, another traveler had already begun his own journey, and with every mile between them, the hunt became more difficult. The first 2 days passed without sight of the enemy, yet the Grey Hunter measured progress by signs that would have escaped almost every traveler. Moss had been crushed where heavy boots had slipped across damp stone. A thorn bush bore fresh tears where rough hands had forced a path through it. And once he found the ashes of a small fire hidden beneath a shelf of rock. The coals had been carefully scattered before the travelers departed, but a faint warmth still lingered beneath the black dust when he pressed the back of his fingers against it. Whoever had camped there understood pursuit well enough to conceal their trail. That alone convinced him he followed no ordinary orc patrol. The land grew harsher as he pressed northward. The forests thinned into broken hills where ancient oaks clung stubbornly to cracked slopes, their roots twisting through stone like weathered fingers. Streams ran cold from the distant mountains, carrying fragments of black ash that drifted upon the surface before settling along the banks. Even the birds seemed reluctant to remain there. Hours often passed without a single song, broken only by the restless wind moving through bare branches that had long ago ceased to bloom. Toward the evening of the third day, he climbed a ridge overlooking a narrow valley where an abandoned road disappeared between steep cliffs. Once it had carried merchants and messengers during the years when the kingdoms of the Noldor still stood against Angband. Now broken wagons lay half buried beneath weeds, their wheels rotted away until only rusted iron rims remained. The Grey Hunter crouched among wind-bent heather and studied the road below for a long while. Patience had saved his life more often than any weapon, and he refused to waste it now. At last he saw movement where shadow gathered beneath a leaning cliff. An orc emerged cautiously from the darkness, scanning the valley before raising one hand toward companions hidden behind the rocks. One by one they appeared until 13 figures stood upon the ruined road. 12 bore shields and short spears, their armor scarred by years of hard service. The 13th wore a black cloak over his mail and carried no spear at all. Instead, a leather case hung across his back, secured so carefully that the Grey Hunter doubted it contained anything as ordinary as supplies. He remained perfectly still while the company resumed its march. The wind favored him, carrying the smell of damp stone and cold earth down the slope instead of drawing his own scent toward the orcs below. He counted their pace, watched how often they looked behind them, and noticed that the cloaked captain never walked in the center of the group. He stayed close to the front, flanked by 2 veterans whose eyes rarely left the surrounding hills. This messenger expected pursuit. Perhaps Morgoth himself had warned him that hunters already walked abroad. The Grey Hunter allowed nearly half an hour to pass before descending from the ridge. He reached the abandoned road only after the last echoes of iron-shod boots had vanished into the distance. Kneeling beside the packed earth, he examined each footprint with quiet concentration. Several orcs limped slightly beneath heavy burdens, but the captain's stride remained steady and measured, despite traveling over rough ground. Such discipline spoke of long experience rather than brute strength. This was not merely a courier. He was someone Morgoth trusted above many others. Clouds rolled across the sky before sunset, bringing a cold rain that darkened every stone and turned narrow paths into ribbons of slick mud. The Grey Hunter welcomed the weather despite its discomfort. Rain softened old tracks, but also muffled sound, allowing him to move more freely through woodland where dry branches might otherwise betray him. Water streamed from the hood of his cloak, while his boots sank silently into wet moss. He pressed onward until twilight settled across the hills, knowing the orcs would eventually be forced to seek shelter. He found them after nightfall without ever seeing their campfire. Instead, he smelled smoke drifting faintly through the rain before catching sight of a dim glow hidden beneath a rocky overhang. The orcs had built a fire deep within the shelter, where its light could scarcely be seen from outside. The Grey Hunter climbed carefully above them until he lay upon the ridge overlooking the camp. Through gaps between stones, he counted every guard and listened as rough voices drifted upward with the smoke. Most of their speech was the harsh tongue of Angband, but now and then a few familiar words emerged from the guttural murmur. The Grey Hunter understood enough to grasp their meaning. They complained of the long road, cursed the endless rain, and argued over whether the armies from the west had truly crossed the sea. One younger orc laughed nervously and claimed the Valar themselves would never dare challenge Morgoth. An older soldier struck him across the mouth and growled that fools who underestimated the enemy seldom lived to regret it. The cloaked captain spoke only once, yet every other voice fell silent the instant he did. His tone remained calm, almost cold, carrying neither anger nor excitement. "No delays," he said. "We reach the fortress before the moon is full. The master expects every commander to receive his orders before the western host marches inland." No one questioned him after that. Even the crackling fire seemed louder than the uneasy silence that followed. The Grey Hunter eased backward from the edge of the ridge until darkness concealed him once more. The fortress. At last he possessed more than suspicion. Somewhere ahead waited one of Morgoth's hidden strongholds, still manned after years of secrecy, ready to strike once the Great War began. If he destroyed the messenger before learning its location, another danger might simply remain unseen. He would have to let the captain lead him farther into the north, though every mile increased the risk of losing him. He slept little before dawn, sheltering beneath the roots of an ancient oak whose trunk had split during some forgotten storm. Rain drummed softly upon the leaves overhead, while distant thunder rolled from the direction of Thangorodrim. In uneasy dreams, he remembered older battles, the roar of dragons above burning cities, and the faces of companions who had fallen one by one until only memory marched beside him. When he opened his eyes, the eastern sky had begun to pale, and the forest smelled fresh beneath the night's rain. Somewhere ahead, the orc company was already breaking camp, believing itself unwatched, while behind them, the Grey Hunter rose without a sound and continued the pursuit. The orc company broke camp before sunrise, leaving behind almost nothing that would reveal where they had rested. The fire had been buried beneath damp earth, scraps of food were carried away instead of discarded, and even the trampled ground had been brushed with pine branches to confuse pursuit. The Grey Hunter examined the abandoned shelter after they were gone, moving slowly through the shadows with the patience of long habit. Whoever commanded these soldiers had trained them with unusual discipline, and that alone deepened his concern. Morgoth had many brutal captains, but few who valued silence more than fear. The trail bent steadily northeast toward rough country, where the land rose in broken shelves of stone. Low clouds drifted between the hills, wrapping the ridges in pale mist that shifted with every passing breeze. More than once, the Grey Hunter lost sight of the orcs entirely, forced to trust faint tracks and scattered signs until the mist opened again. Every step demanded caution, for the valleys narrowed into places where an ambush could spring from either side without warning. He found himself pausing more often than before, listening to the silence until he could separate the wind from the distant clink of armor. Near midday, he discovered something that did not belong to the orcs. Hidden beneath a cluster of hazel bushes lay the remains of a small camp no more than a day old. The ashes were cool, the blankets gone, yet someone had left behind a broken leather strap and the heel of a boot worn in the fashion of the Eden. Kneeling beside the cold fire, the Grey Hunter noticed that 3 different people had slept there. Their footprints led north for a short distance before veering sharply east, as though they had suddenly chosen to avoid the valley ahead. He wondered whether they had seen the orcs or merely sensed danger upon the road. He followed their trail for a short while until he found the answer. At the edge of a narrow stream, hidden beneath alder trees, lay the body of a young man, with an arrow buried deep between his shoulders. His sword remained in its scabbard, untouched, and his face had been turned gently toward the sky by surviving companions before they departed. There was no sign that orcs had searched the corpse. They had killed him swiftly and continued on their journey without wasting precious time. The Grey Hunter closed the young man's eyes, gathered loose stones from the stream bank, and built a small cairn that would protect the body from wolves until kin might someday return. As he rose from the grave, movement flickered beyond the trees. His hand flew to his bow before conscious thought could catch it, and an arrow rested against the string almost instantly. A figure emerged slowly from behind, an ancient oak with empty hands raised to shoulder height. He was a man well past middle age, his dark beard streaked with grey and his cloak torn by many hard miles. Behind him stepped a younger woman carrying a hunting spear, while a boy scarcely 15 winters old remained hidden among the trees with a short bow clutched tightly in trembling hands. "We seek no quarrel," the older man said, his voice low enough that it scarcely disturbed the forest. "If you wished us dead, we would already lie beside our kinsman." The Grey Hunter did not lower his weapon immediately. His eyes moved from one stranger to another, judging their posture, their breathing, and the fear they struggled to conceal. None bore the stain of orc service, nor the desperate look of brigands driven beyond reason by hunger. At last, he eased the tension from the bowstring without returning the arrow to his quiver. "You followed them," he replied. "Why?" The older man glanced toward the fresh cairn before answering. "Because they came through our valley 3 nights ago." Grief roughened every word, though he spoke with remarkable control. "They burned the storehouse, killed our watchman, and took one of our people alive. We thought perhaps they carried him north." His gaze lingered upon the stones covering the fallen youth. "Instead, they left us this." The Grey Hunter listened without interruption. The tale matched too many others he had heard over long centuries, yet every village suffered it, as though evil had been born anew. "I have tracked the same company since the southern forests," he said quietly. "They are not raiders. Their road leads to something greater." The woman exchanged a quick glance with the older man before speaking for the first time. "Then let us walk it with you." He shook his head almost before she finished. "They are trained soldiers. If they discover us, none of you will outrun them." The boy stepped from hiding despite the warning, his face pale but stubborn beneath rain-dark hair. "I can shoot," he insisted. "My father taught me before." His voice faltered as memory caught him, yet he forced himself onward. "Before he died." The Grey Hunter looked into the youth's eyes and saw courage struggling against fear rather than replacing it. That, he thought, was often the truer kind. For several moments, only the stream spoke between them. Then the hunter crouched and drew a rough map upon damp earth with the tip of an arrow. "There is an old shepherd's path leading east into safer hills," he said. "Follow it until you reach the River Syrian. Beyond the marshes, you may find other refugees or scouts from Círdan's people." The older man studied the drawing, but didn't move. "And if we refuse?" he asked. "Then you will slow me," the Grey Hunter answered without harshness, "and I will fail the task entrusted to me. If that happens, The same fate that found your village may fall upon many others before this war is done." Silence settled again. At length, the older man bowed his head, not in surrender but in understanding. He knew enough of war to recognize that some battles demanded sacrifice before swords were ever drawn. Before they parted, the woman reached beneath her cloak and removed a small water skin. "Take this," she said. "There is fresh spring water inside. We can refill ours before nightfall." The Grey Hunter accepted it with quiet gratitude, aware that such a gift cost these travelers far more than it cost him. In return, he handed the boy 3 finely made arrows from his own quiver, each fletched with grey feathers and tipped with steel. "Do not waste them hunting rabbits," he said with the faintest hint of a smile. "Keep them for enemies that deserve them." They went their separate ways beneath a sky that had begun to clear at last. Sunlight broke through scattered clouds, touching the distant peaks with pale gold before fading beneath drifting smoke from the north. The Grey Hunter watched until the little family disappeared among the eastern hills, hoping they had enough wisdom to follow the safer road. Then he turned once more toward the narrowing valleys where the Orc Company marched unseen beyond the ridges. Every hour carried them closer to their hidden destination, and with each mile, the hunter felt the shadow of Angband growing heavier upon the land, as though the dark enemy already sensed that someone had begun to unravel his designs. For the next 3 days, the Grey Hunter saw the Orc Company only in passing, never allowing himself to draw close enough for a careless glance to betray him. The valleys narrowed into steep ravines where dark streams rushed over jagged stone, and every ridge seemed to hide another beyond it. He traveled above the enemy whenever he could, choosing difficult paths along broken cliffs instead of the easier roads below. It cost him strength, but it granted him the advantage of sight, and sight was worth more than comfort. Several times he noticed the captain halt without warning to study the heights, as though some instinct whispered that unseen eyes followed his march. By the 4th morning, the land had changed again. Grass became sparse beneath scattered patches of black gravel, and the trees grew twisted and stunted, their branches reaching across the slopes like pleading hands. A faint smell of sulphur drifted upon the wind, almost too weak to notice, unless one had spent years hunting near the borders of Morgoth's realm. The Grey Hunter paused beside a spring that seeped from cracked stone and tasted the water. It remained cold and clean, but he remembered when every stream in these hills had flowed clear without carrying even the scent of Angband. The shadow spread slowly, yet it spread without rest. Near midday, he reached the crest of a rocky escarpment and looked north. Far beyond the nearer hills, half hidden beneath curtains of smoke, rose the vast silhouettes of Thangorodrim. Their black peaks pierced the clouds like broken teeth, and dull red light pulsed beneath them, where the furnaces of Angband never ceased their labor. Even at this great distance, the mountains seemed to dominate the land, casting an unseen weight over every valley below. The Grey Hunter had glimpsed them many times during his long life, yet they always awakened the same quiet unease. No living creature could look upon that fortress without remembering how many kingdoms had already fallen before it. The Orc Company halted beneath the shelter of a ruined watchtower shortly before evening. The tower had once belonged to the Noldor, though little remained except a fragment of its western wall and the lower courses of white stone buried beneath ivy. The Grey Hunter watched from the opposite hillside while the soldiers searched the ruins with practiced care before allowing their captain inside. Nothing about their movements suggested weariness. They behaved like warriors entering a place already known to them, following routines repeated many times before. As darkness settled over the hills, the hunter left his vantage point and circled carefully behind the ruins. The wind favored him once more, carrying the smell of damp earth and old stone away from the camp. Keeping low among thick patches of bracken, he reached the shattered foundation without disturbing so much as a loose pebble. Through a narrow crack where the wall had collapsed, he peered into the tower's interior. The captain knelt alone upon the floor, while the other orcs remained outside, standing watch beneath the broken walls. At first, the Grey Hunter thought the captain merely rested, but then he saw him lift a flat stone from the floor. Beneath it lay a narrow cavity no larger than a helmet. From within the hollow, the orc withdrew a bundle wrapped in oilskin, untied the cords, and spread several parchments upon the dusty flagstones. His thick fingers traced lines written in black ink, while he muttered quietly to himself, committing the route to memory. After a few moments, he added fresh markings with a sharpened piece of charcoal, before rolling the maps together again. The hidden compartment was sealed once more so carefully that no stranger would ever suspect it existed. The Grey Hunter withdrew into darkness, his thoughts moving swiftly. Morgoth's messengers were not simply carrying orders from Ongband. Secret caches had been prepared long before the War of Wrath began, allowing travelers to collect maps, instructions, and perhaps supplies without returning to the Iron Fortress itself. The plan spoke of years of preparation. Every hidden station reduced the chance that one captured messenger might expose the whole network. Morgoth had woven his web with the same patience that had once built his empire. The hunter waited until midnight before approaching the ruined tower. By then the guards had settled into a predictable pattern, changing places every quarter hour with mechanical precision. Timing each movement against the drifting clouds, he slipped through a breach in the outer wall and reached the chamber where the captain had worked earlier. Kneeling beside the worn flagstones, he searched by touch rather than sight until his fingers found the edge of the concealed slab. Slowly he lifted it just enough to slide a hand beneath. The compartment contained only one object. It was not another map, but a small strip of hammered copper engraved with the same strange emblem he had seen upon the orc captain's helmet. 3 crooked claws surrounded a black circle worked into the metal with remarkable skill. Turning it over, he discovered a series of tiny scratches arranged in deliberate groups. They were too regular to be accidental. They resembled a code rather than writing, meant to be understood only by those who had learned its pattern. He had no time to study it further. Outside, boots scraped against loose stone, and a harsh voice muttered something that ended with a short laugh. The Grey Hunter replaced the copper token exactly where he had found it, lowered the slab without a sound, and flattened himself against the cold wall as a guard entered the chamber. The orc carried a smoking torch that filled the room with the smell of pitch, its flickering light creeping across broken masonry, only a few strides from where the elf stood, hidden behind the deepest shadow. The guard yawned loudly, scratched beneath his dented helmet, and glanced around with obvious boredom before spitting onto the floor. The moment stretched until even breathing seemed dangerous. A single misplaced step or the faint scrape of leather upon stone would end the pursuit before it truly began. The torchlight drifted slowly across the chamber, pausing near the concealed compartment, then turning toward the doorway once more. Muttering another complaint about the cold, the orc shuffled back outside without ever realizing another living soul had shared the room with him. Only after the footsteps faded did the Grey Hunter allow the air to leave his lungs. He withdrew from the ruins as carefully as he had entered, climbing the hillside until darkness swallowed him completely. Resting beneath an ancient hawthorn, he looked back toward the broken tower where the watchfire burned faintly against the night. Somewhere ahead waited the hidden fortress that served as the heart of Morgoth's secret messengers. Yet now the hunter knew there were many more such places scattered across Beleriand. Destroying one courier would not be enough if the network itself remained untouched. As the cold wind descended from the northern mountains, he understood that his mission had quietly become far larger than even Círdan had imagined. The Orc company departed before the stars had faded, leaving the ruined watchtower behind as though it had never sheltered them. Frost silvered the broken stones, and each breath drifted white through the cold morning air. The grey hunter waited until the last echo of iron-shod boots disappeared among the hills before he descended from his hiding place. He paused inside the empty tower only long enough to study the chamber once more, committing every detail to memory. Whatever purpose the hidden compartment served, he knew others like it would almost certainly lie ahead. The trail climbed steadily into harsher country, where ancient roads had long ago surrendered to rock slides and creeping moss. Here the land bore scars older than memory, carved by wars fought before many kingdoms of elves had even been founded. Great boulders lay scattered across the slopes, as though giants had hurled them in forgotten anger, while narrow gullies twisted between them like dry riverbeds. The grey hunter advanced with deliberate care, often stopping to kneel beside disturbed gravel or broken lichen. The orcs still concealed their passage well, yet heavy armor always left traces that even centuries of discipline could not entirely erase. Near midday he noticed something unusual. Ravens had gathered upon a ridge ahead, circling without their usual cries before settling among the stones. Such birds often followed armies in hope of carrion, but these behaved differently. They watched the valley below with unnatural stillness, lifting their heads together whenever the wind shifted. The grey hunter remained motionless behind a cluster of thorn bushes, studying them until understanding slowly emerged. They were not waiting for the dead. They were watching the road. He circled far to the west, climbing a difficult slope that left his hands scraped and his cloak streaked with pale dust. From the higher ground, he looked back toward the ridge where the ravens perched. Below them, nearly hidden among broken rocks, stood a crude stone pillar no taller than a man's waist. Upon its weathered surface, someone had carved the same three-clawed emblem he had seen inside the ruined tower. Moss concealed most of the mark from casual travelers, but anyone searching for it would find it easily enough. Morgoth's messengers did not rely solely upon maps. They had marked the land itself. The realization troubled him more deeply than he wished to admit. Such signs could remain unnoticed for generations, guiding loyal servants even after kingdoms had vanished and roads had crumbled away. Morgoth had always preferred corruption that endured beyond the lives of those who first carried it out. A hidden fortress might fall, but markers carved into forgotten stone could survive until another servant rediscovered them. The grey hunter wondered how many times he had unknowingly walked past such signs during his long years upon the wild roads. By late afternoon, the valleys broadened into an upland plain where coarse grass bent beneath an unceasing northern wind. The orc company had slowed its pace, no longer pressing forward with the urgency that had marked earlier days. Instead, they advanced cautiously, sending 2 scouts ahead before each rise, while the captain consulted his surroundings with growing attention. He was nearing a destination. The grey hunter sensed it as surely as a stag senses water hidden beyond the next ridge. The hunter chose a rocky outcrop overlooking the plain and settled there to observe. From that height, he could follow the movements of the orcs without exposing himself, though the distance made finer details difficult to distinguish. As the sun descended behind the western hills, a lone rider emerged from the north. Mounted upon a dark, broad-shouldered horse, the newcomer wore a hooded cloak whose edges snapped sharply in the wind. The orc company halted immediately, weapons lowered but not sheathed, waiting until the rider approached. The meeting was brief. The mounted figure never dismounted, nor did he remove his hood, yet his authority was unmistakable. The captain produced a sealed leather packet from beneath his cloak and handed it upward without a word. The rider inspected the seals carefully before returning the packet unopened. Then he spoke in a low voice that carried only fragments across the distance. The Grey Hunter caught a few words in the black speech, enough to understand that the packet remained incomplete. More messages were still to be gathered before the journey reached its end. When the rider turned his horse and disappeared into the northern mist, the Grey Hunter remained frozen in place. This changed everything. He had assumed the captain carried Morgoth's final orders. Instead, he served as a collector, assembling dispatches from hidden stations scattered across the land before carrying them onward to the true fortress. That meant each cache contained information of its own, perhaps reports from spies, counts of hidden troops, or instructions prepared years in advance. Morgoth's network reached farther than anyone on the Isle of Balar had imagined. The orcs resumed their march shortly before sunset, but now they left the plain and entered a narrow gorge where steep cliffs rose on either side. The Grey Hunter waited until darkness deepened before following, keeping well above the canyon floor whenever the terrain allowed. The gorge twisted sharply, concealing the travelers from view every few hundred paces, and more than once he feared he had lost them altogether. Then a faint clatter of armor would rise from below, reassuring him that the hunt continued. The walls of the gorge seemed to swallow every sound, leaving only scattered echoes that lingered long after the voices themselves had ceased. Well after midnight, he reached a ledge overlooking the deepest part of the ravine. There he stopped so suddenly that his heartbeat seemed louder than the wind. Below him, concealed beneath an overhanging cliff, burned a line of carefully shielded lanterns. Their light revealed a stout gate of dark timber, reinforced with iron, set directly into the living rock. It was too small to admit an army, yet far too substantial to guard a mere storehouse. 2 orc sentries stood outside, while others emerged briefly to admit the captain and his escort, before the gate swung shut once more. The Grey Hunter remained motionless for a long while, scarcely trusting what he had seen. This was not the fortress he sought. It was an outpost, hidden so perfectly within the gorge that even an experienced ranger might have walked past it 100 times without noticing. If such places existed here, there could be many others buried among the northern hills. He studied every contour of the cliff, every crack in the stone, every approach that might later serve as a path inside. Then he settled silently beneath the shadow of a wind-carved boulder, his eyes fixed upon the concealed gate. Before dawn, he intended to learn who entered that place, who left it, and whether Morgoth's secret road extended even deeper into the mountains beyond. The Grey Hunter did not move from his hiding place until the eastern sky began to pale behind a veil of thin cloud. The concealed gate remained closed throughout the night, and only twice did its silence break when orc sentries exchanged their watch. Neither laughed nor spoke beyond a few clipped words, and even those were delivered in low voices that barely rose above the wind. Discipline ruled this place as firmly as fear ruled Angband itself. The hunter found that more troubling than any display of strength, for disciplined enemies rarely made careless mistakes. When daylight reached the upper cliffs, activity stirred below. The heavy gate opened only wide enough to admit a single wagon, drawn by 2 shaggy hill ponies. Its wheels had been wrapped in strips of leather to muffle their sound, and every crate it carried was covered with coarse canvas secured by ropes. 4 orcs accompanied it on foot, while a 5th walked several paces ahead, studying the gorge with alert, suspicious eyes. The wagon turned south instead of north, disappearing the way the Grey Hunter himself had come. Supplies, he thought, enough to sustain a hidden garrison without drawing attention from larger roads. He remained where he was until the wagon had vanished completely before descending the steep slope with painstaking care. Loose stones shifted beneath his boots, and more than once he was forced to cling to cold rock while pebbles rattled into the ravine below. None reached the sentries, yet the sound reminded him how quickly patience could be undone by haste. At the foot of the cliff, he discovered that the gorge walls concealed several narrow shelves invisible from above. One led almost directly toward the hidden entrance, before disappearing behind a curtain of thorn bushes and weathered stone. The shelf ended beside a spring whose clear water emerged from a crack in the cliff before flowing quietly into the ravine. Kneeling there, the Grey Hunter noticed something curious upon the damp earth. Bootprints crossed the mud, but they were not orc tracks. They belonged to dwarves. Their boots were broader, their stride shorter, and the deep impressions suggested they had carried heavy burdens. At least 6 had passed this way within the last fortnight. The hunter frowned as he studied the evidence. No free dwarves would willingly supply Morgoth, and those enslaved within Angband rarely travelled beyond its reach. He followed the prints only a short distance before they vanished upon harder ground, yet the discovery lingered uneasily in his thoughts. Morgoth had often driven captives to labor beneath whip and chain, forcing them to mine ore, raise fortifications, or forge weapons until exhaustion claimed them. If dwarven craftsmen had been compelled to work within this hidden network, they might possess knowledge no orc ever would. They might also long for escape. The possibility was dangerous to consider, but impossible to ignore. The day passed slowly, while the Grey Hunter observed the outpost from changing positions around the gorge. By afternoon, he had counted 21 orc soldiers, not including those who remained inside the gate, and he suspected at least twice that number hidden beneath the mountain. No banners flew above the entrance, no towers overlooked the valley, and no smoke escaped into the open air. Everything about the place had been built to vanish into the landscape. It was less a fortress than a concealed doorway leading toward something far greater. As evening approached, chance favored him at last. The gate opened once more, and 2 orc guards dragged a hooded prisoner into the fading light. The captive stumbled, caught himself upon one knee, and received a sharp blow from the butt of a spear before struggling upright again. Though dirt and torn clothing concealed much, the Grey Hunter immediately recognized the prisoner's build. He was one of the Norgrim, broad-shouldered and powerfully made despite the chains fastened around his wrists. His beard had been crudely hacked short, and one eye was swollen nearly shut, yet he still met his captors with fierce, unbroken defiance. The guards forced the dwarf toward the spring, while another remained near the gate with drawn sword. One chain was loosened just enough to allow the prisoner to kneel and drink. Even then, the dwarf glanced constantly toward the surrounding cliffs, his gaze sharp, despite obvious exhaustion. The Grey Hunter remained hidden, scarcely 30 paces away, every instinct urging him to intervene. Yet 20 armed orcs stood within shouting distance. One arrow would save the prisoner for only a heartbeat before both of them perished. Instead, he watched. The dwarf drank deeply, then lifted his head as though listening to the wind. For the briefest instant, his eyes settled upon the thorn bushes concealing the grey hunter. There was no sign of surprise, no widening of the eyes, no careless movement that might betray what he had seen. Yet something changed almost imperceptibly. As he rose to his feet, he deliberately stumbled again, this time allowing a small object to slip from beneath his sleeve into the grass beside the spring. An orc cursed him and jerked the chain hard enough to send him forward. Moments later, the prisoner vanished back through the gate. The grey hunter remained perfectly still until darkness settled over the gorge once more. Only then did he creep toward the spring, searching carefully among the wet grass where the dwarf had fallen. His fingers closed around a fragment of dark stone, scarcely larger than a walnut. At first it appeared ordinary, but one side had been polished smooth and marked with finely carved runes. He recognized enough of the script to understand only a few words. Mine, east, below. The remaining signs formed abbreviations known only to dwarven craftsmen. He turned the stone over several times, considering what it implied. The prisoner had not dropped it by accident. Somehow he had recognized another enemy of Morgoth, watching from the cliffs, and risked severe punishment to leave a message. The runes spoke not of the hidden outpost itself, but of something deeper beneath the mountains, perhaps a mine or tunnel extending far beyond the visible gate. If that were true, the concealed road did not merely connect scattered stations across Beleriand. It reached underground, where orcs, slaves, and secret messengers could travel unseen beneath the very feet of those who searched for them. The wind freshened after sunset, carrying with it the distant smell of smoke from the north and the faint, dull tremor of great forges working without rest. The grey hunter tucked the rune stone safely inside his cloak and climbed once more to the overlooking cliffs. Below him, the hidden gate blended so completely with the mountainside that it seemed part of the living rock itself. He now understood that following the orc captain alone would no longer reveal enough. Somewhere beneath those hills lay the true heart of Morgoth's hidden network, and the only soul who might know its paths had just vanished back into darkness behind an iron-bound door. The grey hunter spent the greater part of the night studying the hidden entrance, measuring every change in the guard's routine until the pattern settled firmly in his mind. 2 sentries remained outside the gate at all times, but every third watch they were relieved by 4 soldiers instead of 2, and for several minutes the doorway stood open while orders were exchanged. No torch was ever carried beyond the threshold. Instead, pale blue lamps glimmered somewhere inside the passage, their cold light spilling briefly across the stone before the gate closed again. Whoever commanded the outpost wished to conceal even the glow of fire from wandering eyes. He descended from the cliffs shortly before dawn, choosing the narrow ledge beside the spring once more. There he waited beneath a tangle of thorn and ivy, while mist drifted slowly through the gorge, thick enough to soften outlines without hiding movement altogether. The cold seeped through his cloak and settled into his bones. Yet he welcomed the discomfort. A patient hunter often endured more from weather than from enemies. He had learned long ago that the land itself could become an ally if given enough time. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Just after sunrise, the gate opened to admit another supply wagon, this one returning empty from the south. The ponies snorted impatiently as they were led inside, and the guard stepped aside to make room along the narrow passage. For a few precious heartbeats, the entrance lay almost unguarded, while attention focused upon the animals and the heavy wheels scraping over stone. The grey hunter slipped from concealment and reached the shadow beside the gateway before a single orc thought to glance toward the spring. Pressed flat against the cold rock, he waited while the wagon rolled deeper into the mountain. The passage beyond descended at a steady angle, its walls roughly cut from living stone rather than carefully carved. Blue lamps hung from iron brackets at regular intervals, burning with an eerie, smokeless flame that cast long shadows across the tunnel floor. The air smelled of damp earth, cold iron, and distant forge smoke, though no hammering could yet be heard. The Grey Hunter advanced only when every sound ahead was masked by the creaking wagon. Each careful step carried him farther beneath the mountain and farther from any easy escape. After several hundred paces, the passage divided into 3 tunnels. The wagon continued along the central route toward a broad chamber, illuminated by many lamps, while the left-hand tunnel vanished into complete darkness. The right passage sloped downward more sharply, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of flowing water. The Grey Hunter withdrew behind a stone pillar as 2 orcs emerged from the lower tunnel carrying empty buckets. They grumbled about leaking roofs and broken timbers before disappearing toward the entrance without noticing him. The conversation lasted only moments, but it revealed something important. This place extended much deeper than the visible chambers suggested. He followed the sound of water. The descending tunnel twisted through natural caverns where ancient roots protruded from the ceiling like the ribs of some buried beast. Moisture gleamed upon the walls, and narrow channels carried icy streams beneath rough wooden bridges hastily built by orc hands. At last, the passage widened into a cavern where a swift underground river flowed between black stone banks. A crude dock had been built there, holding 3 flat-bottomed boats secured by heavy chains. Beyond them, the river disappeared into darkness, its destination hidden by a bend in the rock. The Grey Hunter crouched behind stacked barrels while 2 orc boatmen argued beside the water. One complained that another convoy would soon arrive from the eastern mines, bringing ore and prisoners before continuing north. The other spat into the river and cursed the endless work, insisting that no battle above ground could possibly matter, while the true roads lay beneath the mountains. The Grey Hunter listened carefully, committing every word to memory. Underground rivers, hidden convoys, eastern mines. Morgoth had built a network that allowed men, weapons, and supplies to move unseen across great distances, protected from scouts and hidden from the armies gathering in the west. A sharp clang echoed through the cavern, followed by the harsh blast of a horn somewhere above. The boatmen immediately abandoned their conversation and hurried toward the upper passage. The Grey Hunter remained hidden until silence returned, then crossed swiftly to the dock. One of the boats carried several sealed crates stamped with the familiar 3-clawed emblem. Another held coils of rope, mining tools, and sacks of grain. The third remained empty, except for a heavy iron chain secured to its stern. Fresh scratches marked the planks where something large had recently been transported. He had barely finished examining the boats when voices approached from the darkness beyond the river bend. There was no time to retreat. Slipping beneath the dock, he lowered himself silently into the freezing water until only his nose and eyes remained above the surface. Moments later, another boat emerged from the tunnel, guided by 2 orcs using long poles. Between them sat 6 chained prisoners, all dwarves, their hands bound, but their backs still straight despite exhaustion. The Grey Hunter recognized none of their faces, yet he noticed something remarkable. As the prisoners passed beneath the blue lamps, several exchanged brief glances that needed no words. They were counting turns in the river, measuring distances, remembering every detail. Even in captivity, they searched constantly for a road to freedom. The boat scraped against the dock, and the prisoners were driven ashore beneath a storm of shouted orders. One elderly dwarf stumbled while climbing onto the stone landing, earning a savage kick from an impatient guard. Before anyone could strike him again, another prisoner deliberately dropped his chain, forcing the orcs to halt while it was untangled. The delay lasted only seconds, yet it spared the old craftsman another beating. Watching unseen from beneath the dock, the Grey Hunter understood that these captives had not surrendered to despair. They protected one another however they could, using small acts of courage that their jailers scarcely noticed. When the last footsteps faded into the upper tunnels, the hunter pulled himself quietly from the icy river. Water streamed from his cloak as he stood listening to the distant echoes disappearing into the mountain. The hidden outpost was no isolated station after all. It was the gateway to an underground road stretching east toward slave mines and north toward whatever fortress awaited Morgoth's messenger. Círdan had feared scattered strongholds hidden across Beleriand. The truth was darker still. Beneath the ruined land lay an unseen kingdom of tunnels through which the servants of Angband could travel without ever setting foot beneath the open sky. And now the Grey Hunter had entered it alone. The Grey Hunter remained beside the underground river until the last echoes of boots had faded into the labyrinth above. Water dripped steadily from his cloak, pooling around his feet before slipping into the dark current that flowed endlessly through the mountain. The cold had settled deep into his limbs, but he dared not stop to warm himself. Every passing moment carried the orc captain farther toward his destination, and every delay increased the chance that the hidden orders would be delivered. Drawing a slow breath, he followed the tunnel taken by the prisoners, keeping close to the damp wall where the blue lamps cast the deepest shadows. The passage climbed gradually through rough-hewn galleries supported by massive timber beams. Pick marks scarred the stone in every direction, some fresh, others worn smooth by years of labor. The air grew heavier with the smell of iron dust, coal smoke, and sweat until breathing itself became an effort. Soon another sound reached him, faint at first, but growing steadily louder with each careful step. It was the measured ringing of hammers striking anvils, joined by the groan of great bellows feeding unseen furnaces somewhere ahead. The tunnel opened at last onto a broad chamber that had once been a natural cavern before orc engineers transformed it into a hidden forge. Furnaces glowed along one wall, their fires burning hot enough to paint the ceiling crimson despite the strange blue lamps hanging overhead. Rows of anvils stood beneath the stone vault where dwarven prisoners worked under the watch of heavily armed orc overseers. Chains linked many of them together in pairs, allowing enough freedom to labor while denying any hope of escape. Yet their hands remained as skilled as ever, shaping iron with precision that no orc smith could equal. The Grey Hunter concealed himself behind towering stacks of timber and watched in silence. Wagons entered the forge from one tunnel carrying raw ore and departed through another, laden with spearheads, sword blades, armor plates, and heavy bolts for siege engines. Everything moved with relentless efficiency. Orders were barked, hammers rose and fell, bellows roared, and fresh fuel was shoveled into roaring fires without pause. This hidden workshop alone could supply thousands of soldiers, and it lay buried so deeply beneath the mountains that no scout riding across Beleriand would ever suspect its existence. As he studied the chamber, he noticed the same elderly dwarf who had stumbled beside the river. The old craftsman now stood before an anvil, shaping a long strip of glowing steel, while an orc captain watched every movement with narrowed eyes. Despite exhaustion, the dwarf's hammer never faltered. His beard was streaked with soot, his shoulders bent by years of forced labor. Yet there remained unmistakable dignity in the way he held himself. The Grey Hunter found his gaze lingering there longer than intended. Chains could command a craftsman's hands, but they had not broken his spirit. A sudden disturbance rippled through the forge. Every hammer ceased at once, and even the orc overseers stepped back from their prisoners. Through the eastern tunnel came the black-cloaked messenger, whom the Grey Hunter had pursued across half of Beleriand. Dust clung to his boots, yet he walked with the same measured confidence as before, carrying the leather case securely beneath one arm. Two larger orcs accompanied him, both clad in heavier armor, bearing the familiar emblem of the three crooked claws. They exchanged brief words with the forge commander, before disappearing through an iron-bound door at the rear of the chamber. The Grey Hunter slipped away from his hiding place, moving between stacks of finished weapons, while every eye remained fixed upon the messenger. The iron door stood beyond a row of storage racks, guarded by only a single sentry whose attention remained fixed upon the forge. The hunter dared not approach directly. Instead, he circled behind the furnaces until he discovered a narrow maintenance passage cut into the rock. Warm air flowed through it toward the forge, carrying sparks and smoke upward through hidden vents. Stooping low, he entered the cramped tunnel, hoping it would lead somewhere beyond the guarded entrance. The passage proved narrower than expected, forcing him to crawl over uneven stone while hot air pressed against his face. More than once he scraped his shoulders against rough walls or paused as showers of sparks drifted down from cracks overhead. At last, the tunnel widened just enough for him to kneel beneath a lattice of iron bars. Looking through the gaps, he realized he had reached a ventilation shaft overlooking the chamber beyond the guarded door. Below him stretched a large council room carved directly into the mountain, its walls covered with maps, coded markings, and carved reliefs of valleys throughout northern Beleriand. The black-cloaked messenger stood before a heavy stone table where several orc captains had already gathered. At the far end of the room waited another figure, taller than the rest and clad in dark mail chased with dull bronze. His face bore old scars crossing one cheek, and unlike the others, he wore no helmet. His hair, black as burnt pine, fell to his shoulders, revealing that he was no orc at all but one of the corrupted men who had entered Morgoth's service many years before. The room fell silent as he accepted the leather case from the messenger and broke its seals. The Grey Hunter strained to hear every word. The captain spread several parchments across the table, placing small iron markers upon different points of the maps. "The Western invasion has begun," he said, in a voice calm enough to chill the blood. "Our watchers confirm the fleets have crossed the sea. Eonwer will land within days." At the name of the Herald of Manwë, several orcs shifted uneasily, but the captain silenced them with a glance. The master expected this. The hidden companies will not challenge the host directly. They will strike behind it. One by one, he pointed toward marked valleys and abandoned fortresses upon the maps. Hidden garrisons would emerge after the armies of the West marched inland, destroying bridges, attacking supply trains, burning food stores, and hunting isolated companies through the forests. Other forces would drive terrified refugees southward, clogging roads and slowing every advance. The Grey Hunter felt a cold certainty settle within him as the plan unfolded. Morgoth knew he could not easily defeat the host of Valinor in open battle. Instead, he intended to drown the land in confusion, forcing the war to drag on until exhaustion became his greatest ally. Then the corrupted captain reached beneath the table and withdrew a narrow wooden box bound with iron bands. He unlocked it with a small bronze key and lifted the lid. Inside rested several tightly rolled parchments, sealed with black wax bearing Morgoth's own device. The messenger inclined his head respectfully before accepting them. "These go east," the captain ordered. "The Iron Road must remain hidden until the final command is given. If every surface fortress falls, our armies beneath the mountains will still endure." The Grey Hunter stared through the iron lattice without moving, scarcely aware of the heat rising around him. The Iron Road. At last, the hidden network had a name, and with it came a terrible understanding. The tunnels, forges, rivers, slave mines, and concealed outposts were not merely supporting Morgoth's war. They formed an entire Second Kingdom beneath Beleriand, one designed to survive even if Angband itself came under siege. If the host of the West remained ignorant of its existence, victory might slip away despite every triumph won upon the open battlefield. Hidden in the shadows above the council chamber, the Grey Hunter realized that his task had become far greater than hunting a single messenger. Somehow, alone and deep beneath the mountains, he would have to find a way to bring the Iron Road itself to ruin before the War of Wrath truly began. The council did not end when the orders had been distributed. The Grey Hunter remained motionless behind the iron lattice, while the corrupted captain rolled the maps together with deliberate care, his scarred hands lingering over certain valleys longer than others. One by one, the orc officers departed, until only the captain and the black-cloaked messenger remained beside the stone table. Their voices dropped lower, forcing the hunter to lean forward until his cheek nearly touched the warm iron bars. He caught only fragments at first, but each fragment sharpened the danger unfolding beneath the mountain. "The western passages are compromised," the captain said quietly. "Several caches have gone silent." The messenger frowned, though not with fear. "Captured?" The captain shook his head once. "No. Abandoned. The master believes spies have begun searching the old roads." For a brief moment, the Grey Hunter wondered whether his own pursuit had already been sensed, but the captain continued before that thought could take root. "No matter. The Eastern Fortress now holds every report worth preserving. Once you arrive there, burn the copies. Nothing must remain if Angband falls." Those final words settled heavily in the hunter's mind. Burn the copies. Morgoth was preparing even for defeat. If the Iron Road survived after Angband's fall, scattered commanders might continue the war for years, hidden beneath mountains while Beleriand struggled to recover. The Grey Hunter understood at once why Círdan had feared secret messengers more than armies in the field. Armies could be defeated. Hidden knowledge could outlive kingdoms. The messenger accepted the sealed parchments and fastened them carefully inside the leather case. Then he produced another object from beneath his cloak, placing it upon the table with unusual caution. It was a polished stone, no larger than a man's fist, black as volcanic glass, yet threaded with faint crimson veins that seemed to pulse beneath the lamplight. The corrupted captain studied it without touching it. "The beacon?" he asked. The messenger inclined his head. "If the Eastern Fortress is threatened, this will summon every hidden company within 3 days' march." The Grey Hunter's pulse quickened, despite years of disciplined calm. One signal. That was all it would take to awaken countless orc bands concealed across northern Beleriand. Whatever else happened, that stone could never reach its destination. He watched the captain wrap it in thick cloth before returning it to the messenger's case alongside the sealed orders. Every instinct urged him to loose an arrow through the lattice then and there, ending the mission before another heartbeat passed. Yet the bars distorted the angle, and even a perfect shot would leave him trapped deep within the mountain among scores of enemies. When the meeting finally ended, the hunter withdrew from the shaft before anyone emerged into the adjoining corridor. Crawling backward through the narrow ventilation passage proved slower than entering it, and more than once loose gravel shifted beneath his knees. Sweat mixed with soot upon his face, despite the cool air awaiting him beyond the tunnel. At last he reached the forge once more, where the relentless ringing of hammers had resumed, as though nothing of importance had occurred behind the guarded door. The prisoners worked on in grim silence, each blow upon the anvil echoing through the chamber like the ticking of an unseen clock. As he slipped between towering stacks of timber, a quiet scraping sound halted him. The elderly dwarf looked up from his forge without turning his head, his hammer rising and falling with practiced rhythm. Without moving his lips, he spoke scarcely above a whisper, hidden beneath the clang of iron. Third furnace. The grey hunter did not answer. He continued walking at the same measured pace, yet his attention fixed instantly upon the nearest row of blazing hearths. Again the hammer rose and fell. "Broken grate," the old craftsman murmured between strikes. "Lower passage." The hunter trusted neither chance nor riddles, yet something in the dwarf's calm certainty persuaded him. Reaching the third furnace, he crouched briefly as though adjusting a loose bootlace. Behind a pile of charcoal, he discovered an iron grate cracked almost completely through one corner. Warm air rushed upward from darkness below, carrying the smell of damp stone instead of smoke. Someone had weakened the metal deliberately over many months, perhaps years, disguising every fracture beneath layers of soot. The dwarves had not surrendered. They had been preparing. Heavy footsteps approached across the forge floor. The grey hunter stepped away from the grate just as two orc overseers passed within a few paces, arguing over a shipment of spearheads destined for Angband. Neither spared him a glance. Hidden by noise, smoke, and shifting shadows, he waited until they disappeared into another gallery before returning to the cracked ironwork. With slow, controlled pressure, he eased the damaged section aside just enough to reveal a narrow shaft descending into darkness. It would be a difficult climb, even for an elf. For a heavily armored orc, it would be nearly impossible. Before lowering himself into the opening, he looked once more toward the prisoners. The elderly dwarf had resumed his labor without the slightest sign of recognition, while the others kept their eyes fixed firmly upon glowing iron. Not one glanced toward the hidden shaft. They understood that even the smallest mistake would bring ruin upon every captive in the chamber. The grey hunter bowed his head, almost imperceptibly, offering silent thanks for courage that no songs would ever celebrate. Then he slipped through the broken grate, replacing it carefully above him until the darkness swallowed every trace of his passage. The shaft descended steeply through untouched rock, far older than the tunnels carved by orc hands. Water trickled along one wall, filling the confined space with the smell of earth untouched by sunlight since the world was young. The hunter climbed slowly, bracing himself against opposite walls whenever the stone narrowed. After what felt like many minutes, the shaft opened into a forgotten natural cavern, where ancient stalactites hung like the teeth of sleeping giants. There, cut into the dust upon the floor, he found unmistakable signs of repeated passage. They were dwarven footprints. Not the confused tracks of prisoners driven under guard, but deliberate trails left by careful craftsmen moving in secret. Some led deeper into the cavern beyond a curtain of stone pillars. Others returned toward the forge before vanishing beneath the shaft he had just descended. The grey hunter knelt beside the nearest print, tracing its sharp edges with one finger. It could not be more than a day old. Somewhere beneath Morgoth's own hidden stronghold, the dwarves had carved a secret road invisible to their captors. and for the first time since entering the mountain, the hunter realized he might no longer be entirely alone. The grey hunter remained kneeling beside the fresh footprints until every sound from the forge above had faded into a distant murmur. The hidden cavern breathed with an older silence, untouched by the clang of hammers or the harsh voices of orc overseers. Moisture gathered upon the stone ceiling and fell in slow, measured drops that echoed through the darkness like the ticking of an unseen clock. The dwarven tracks continued between towering pillars of limestone before disappearing into shadows too deep for even elven eyes to fully pierce. Drawing a slow breath, the hunter rose and followed them, placing each step with the same care he had once used while stalking deer through the forests of Doriath. The passage wound through natural galleries, unlike the rough tunnels carved by orc labor. Here the stone bore the patient artistry of the earth itself, shaped by countless ages of flowing water into smooth arches and narrow bridges spanning black pools. Pale crystals shimmered faintly upon the walls, catching what little light drifted from cracks high above. The grey hunter found no tool marks, no timber supports, and no signs that Morgoth's servants had discovered this hidden route. The dwarves had chosen wisely. Such places often escaped the notice of those who sought only ore and iron. After nearly an hour, the footprints ended beside a broad slab of granite leaning naturally against the cavern wall. At first glance, it appeared no different from the surrounding rock, yet a closer look revealed faint scratches along its lower edge where strong hands had moved it many times. The hunter pressed one shoulder against the stone and applied steady pressure. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the slab shifted silently inward, opening a narrow passage beyond. Warm air, carrying the smell of fresh bread and wood smoke, drifted into the cavern. The grey hunter stepped through and carefully returned the stone to its place. Before him stretched a hidden chamber, lit by shielded oil lamps, whose gentle glow seemed almost welcoming after the cold blue lights of the orc tunnels. Rough tables had been built from scavenged timber. Blankets lay folded against one wall, and shelves carved into the rock held carefully rationed stores of dried meat, grain, and medicinal herbs. It was no grand refuge, yet it possessed something absent everywhere else beneath the mountain. It felt lived in rather than merely occupied. The quiet did not last. From behind a cluster of stacked barrels came the unmistakable sound of crossbows being cocked. Half a dozen short, sturdy figures emerged from concealment, each aiming a weapon directly at the grey hunter's heart. Their armor was patched together from scavenged mail and worn leather, while soot-darkened faces lined by years of hardship. At their center stood the elderly dwarf from the forge, no longer bent beneath an overseer's gaze, but upright and commanding despite his age. His swollen eye remained half-closed, yet the other watched the stranger with sharp, unwavering caution. For several long moments, no one spoke. The grey hunter slowly unfastened his bow and laid it upon the ground before removing the hunting knife from his belt. He placed both weapons within easy reach, but made no attempt to draw them again. "If I had come as Morgoth's servant," he said calmly, "I would not have entered alone." One of the younger dwarves tightened his grip upon the crossbow. "Or perhaps you hoped one spy could find what a company never could." The old craftsman lifted one hand before tempers could harden further. "You watched the river," the elder said quietly. "You understood the stone I left beside the spring." His voice carried neither trust nor accusation, only careful judgment. The grey hunter inclined his head, enough to know you wished to be found. The old dwarf studied him for another long breath before lowering his own weapon. One by one, the others followed his example, though none relaxed entirely. "Then speak," the elder said. "There is little time and less reason for lies." The Grey Hunter told them everything that mattered and nothing that did not. He spoke of Círdan upon the Isle of Balar, of the host of Valinor crossing the sea beneath the banner of Eärnwe, and of the black-cloaked messenger whose trail had led beneath the mountain. He described the council chamber, the sealed orders, the beacon stone, and the plans to unleash hidden armies once the war began. As he spoke, the faces around him grew steadily grimmer. None interrupted until he uttered the words, "The Iron Road." At that name, several dwarves exchanged uneasy glances. The elder folded his weathered hands upon the table. "So they call it by name now." He looked into the lamplight for a moment before continuing. "I am Borin, son of Bor, once master mason of the eastern halls of the Blue Mountains. 23 years ago, my people were taken while repairing old mines, abandoned after the ruin of Belarion's northern kingdoms. We were not brought here merely to forge weapons. Morgoth desired builders. His rough fingers traced invisible lines across the tabletop. The orcs could carve tunnels well enough, but only dwarves knew how to make them endure beneath mountains that wished to crush them." A heavy silence settled over the chamber. Borin broke it with the weary calm of one who had carried this burden too long. "We built the Iron Road because chains forced our hands. We cut passages through ancient stone, bridged underground rivers, and raised hidden halls where armies might march unseen from one end of the northern lands to the other. Every collapse was repaired, every weakness strengthened. The work never ended." His voice faltered only once, when his gaze drifted toward the younger dwarves gathered nearby. Many who began that labor never lived to see another winter. The Grey Hunter felt the weight of the revelation settle upon him. The Iron Road was no hastily prepared refuge, but a masterpiece of unwilling craftsmanship, shaped by the finest builders in Middle-earth under relentless cruelty. Destroying a single tunnel would accomplish little. Countless alternate passages almost certainly branched beneath the mountains, each designed to survive if another failed. Morgoth had stolen not only the strength of the dwarves, but the very skill that made their people renowned throughout the world. Borin rose slowly and beckoned the hunter toward the far side of the chamber. There, concealed beneath folded blankets, rested a broad stone slab engraved with an astonishingly detailed map. Delicate lines marked tunnels, rivers, ventilation shafts, hidden storehouses, and great halls extending beneath leagues of mountain. Many sections had been scratched out or altered as construction continued over the years, yet enough remained to reveal the terrible scale of the network. Near its eastern edge, Borin rested one calloused finger upon a vast chamber, drawn larger than any other. "The fortress you seek lies here," he said. "The orcs call it Caragdum, the Black Vault. Every messenger passes through its gates before reaching Angband, and within its deepest hall, they keep the master records of the Iron Road." The Grey Hunter studied the carved map without speaking. The distance alone would demand several days of dangerous travel through tunnels crawling with enemies. Even if he reached the Black Vault, stealing or destroying the records would be perilous beyond measure. Yet, as he traced the branching passages with his eyes, another detail caught his attention. One narrow route approached the fortress from beneath instead of above, marked not with orc symbols, but with ancient dwarven runes. Borin saw the look immediately, and gave the faintest of grim smiles. "Yes," the old mason said. "There remains one road Morgoth's captains do not know exists, We hid it while they believed we were repairing a collapse. If any hope remains of reaching the black vault unseen, it begins there." No one spoke for several moments after Borin revealed the hidden passage. The lamps flickered softly against the stone walls, casting long shadows across the carved map, while every dwarf present measured the danger in silence. The Grey Hunter studied the narrow line etched beneath the black vault, noting how it curved away from the larger tunnels before vanishing beneath an area left intentionally blank. Borin rested one weathered hand upon the edge of the map, as though steadying not the stone, but himself. "We carved that passage during the 9th year of our captivity," he said at last. "The Orc overseers believed we were reinforcing a fault in the rock. In truth, we left a road unfinished, then concealed its entrance behind solid stone. None who commanded us ever suspected another tunnel existed." One of the younger dwarves stepped closer, his expression troubled, despite the hope that had entered the chamber. "Even if the passage remains hidden," he said, "the Black Vault is never empty. Hundreds of orcs pass through its halls every day. The records are guarded, and the messenger will already be on his way there." Borin nodded without argument. "That is true, yet there is one advantage we still possess." His finger moved across the map until it rested upon a symbol unlike the others. "The hidden road opens beneath the oldest foundations. Those chambers were built before the rest of the fortress. Their walls are natural stone rather than masonry, and they contain the great support pillars that carry much of the mountain's weight." The Grey Hunter understood before Borin finished speaking. "If those pillars fall," he said quietly, "the deeper halls may collapse." The old mason met his eyes with a grave expression. "Not all of them. The Iron Road is too vast for that. But the Black Vault was built in haste upon unstable ground. We warned the overseers years ago that its lower chambers required stronger foundations. They ignored us. Pride often blinds cruel masters." Another dwarf gave a humorless laugh. "For once their arrogance may prove useful." The hidden refuge stirred with purposeful movement. Dwarves who moments before had seemed exhausted now crossed the chamber gathering tools, coils of rope, bundles of food, and carefully wrapped packets of blasting powder made from volatile minerals stolen over many years. Every item had been hidden piece by piece beneath the eyes of their captors until enough remained for a single desperate chance. The Grey Hunter watched them with quiet admiration. These preparations had not been made in expectation of rescue. They had been made because free people continued planning for freedom even when hope appeared distant. Borin led the hunter toward a heavy wooden chest secured beneath a rough blanket. Inside lay several small leather pouches filled with iron wedges, chisels, and curious black stones threaded with pale crystals. Seeing the Grey Hunter's questioning look, the old mason picked up one of the stones with careful respect. "Fireheart," he explained. "Rare enough that Morgoth values every piece. When struck correctly beside certain powders, it produces heat fierce enough to shatter even stubborn granite." He returned it gently to the chest. "We have gathered only enough for one attempt. If we fail, there will be no second chance." As plans took shape, the Grey Hunter shared everything he had witnessed inside the council chamber. He described the beacon stone carried by the messenger, the sealed parchments awaiting delivery, and the order to burn every duplicate once they reached the eastern fortress. Borin listened without interrupting, but at the mention of the beacon, his expression darkened. "That stone cannot be allowed to leave the Black Vault," he said firmly. "Long before we became prisoners, I heard tales among traders of such things. They are forged in Angban's deepest fires, and carry signals farther than any horn. One of the younger dwarves clenched his fists. Then we destroy it first, even before the records. The Grey Hunter shook his head slowly. If the beacon is destroyed too early, the messenger may realize he has been discovered. He could burn the parchments himself, or send another courier by a different road. Borin considered the argument for a long moment before nodding in reluctant agreement. Then we strike only when every prize lies within our reach. His voice remained calm, but the burden of that decision settled visibly upon his shoulders. Every heartbeat of delay increased the danger. Every hasty action threatened failure. The company chosen for the journey numbered only 7. Borin would lead, for no one alive knew the hidden tunnels better than he. 3 younger dwarves would carry the tools and explosives, while another would remain behind to command the refuge if none returned. The Grey Hunter would scout ahead, wherever silence mattered more than strength. Last among them came a broad-shouldered dwarf named Farin, whose quiet manner concealed remarkable skill with locks and hidden mechanisms. Many of the gates we built were meant to keep armies out, Borin said, as they prepared to depart. It may be useful to have someone who remembers how they were made. Before leaving, the old mason paused beside the concealed entrance to the refuge and looked back at those remaining behind. No stirring speech followed, nor any promise that they would return victorious. Instead, he clasped forearms with each of his companions in turn, exchanging only brief words that needed no witness. The Grey Hunter found himself thinking of Círdan upon the western shore, waiting beneath the same uncertain sky. Great wars often turned upon such quiet moments, unseen by chroniclers and forgotten by history. Yet they were no less important than battles fought beneath banners. The hidden passage began behind another disguised stone door that opened into a tunnel unlike any the hunter had yet seen. Its walls were smooth and carefully fitted, not by orc labor, but by the patient craftsmanship of dwarven hands working before exhaustion had dulled their strength. Ancient tool marks ran in neat rows across the stone, while small vents admitted fresh air from cracks far above. The road descended steadily beneath the mountain, winding between enormous natural pillars that disappeared into darkness overhead. Every sound seemed softened there, as though the earth itself guarded the secret. They traveled for many hours without encountering another living soul. Borin walked at the front, carrying a hooded lamp whose narrow beam illuminated only the next few paces, leaving the rest of the company cloaked in shadow. At intervals he stopped to examine tiny runes carved low upon the walls, marks invisible to anyone unfamiliar with dwarven craft. Sometimes he altered their direction by only a few steps, avoiding passages that appeared identical to the Grey Hunter, but clearly concealed hidden dangers. Once they crossed an ancient stone bridge spanning a chasm so deep that the lamp's light never reached the bottom, and the silence rising from that abyss seemed older than memory itself. Near what the Grey Hunter guessed to be midnight, Borin raised one hand for the company to halt. Ahead, faint sounds drifted through the darkness. They were not the harsh voices of orc guards, nor the steady rhythm of marching boots. Instead, they resembled the distant scraping of stone against stone, followed by the slow groan of massive timbers settling under impossible weight. Borin extinguished the lamp until only darkness surrounded them. Leaning close enough that only those beside him could hear, he whispered, "We have reached the foundations of the Black Vault. Beyond the next bend stand the oldest support pillars. Once we pass them, there will be no turning back." The company advanced in complete darkness until Borin judged it safe to uncover the lamp once more. Its narrow beam revealed a forest of colossal stone pillars rising from the cavern floor, into unseen heights, each broader than the trunks of the oldest beeches that had once grown in Doriath. Deep cracks already scarred several of the supports, and crude iron braces had been driven into the weakest places where hurried orc engineers had attempted to strengthen failing stone. Water seeped steadily through the ceiling, gathering in shallow pools that reflected the pale light like fragments of broken glass. Borin rested one hand upon the nearest pillar and closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. "The mountain has warned them for years," he whispered. "They never listened." Keeping close to the pillars, the Grey Hunter slipped ahead while the dwarves remained behind to prepare their charges. Every step demanded perfect silence, for voices echoed strangely through the ancient foundations. Soon the passage widened into a gallery overlooking the heart of the black vault. Below, countless lamps illuminated a vast hall carved with brutal efficiency rather than beauty. Messengers hurried between long tables covered in maps, scribes copied reports onto fresh parchment, and armed orcs carried sealed packets toward tunnels leading in every direction. At the center of the chamber stood the black-cloaked messenger, placing the leather case before the corrupted captain, whom the Grey Hunter had overheard days before. The hunter remained hidden behind a broken parapet, while the meeting unfolded beneath him. The captain opened the case with obvious satisfaction, withdrawing the beacon stone before setting it carefully upon a carved pedestal of black iron. Beside it, he arranged the sealed parchments received from every hidden outpost across northern Beleriand. Several scribes waited with sharpened quills, prepared to copy the orders before the originals were destroyed. "Before the next moon rises," the captain declared, "every commander upon the Iron Road will know his part. Let the host of the West win 100 battles above the earth. Beneath their feet, our strength will remain unbroken." The gathered officers answered with harsh approval, their voices rolling through the vault like distant thunder. The Grey Hunter withdrew without waiting to hear more. Returning to the hidden chamber beneath the pillars, he found Borin and the others kneeling beside carefully placed bundles of blasting powder, packed into natural fractures within the stone. Fireheart crystals rested nearby, wrapped in cloth to prevent accidental sparks. The old mason looked up as the hunter approached, and needed only one glance to understand what he had seen. "The records?" Borin asked. "All together," the Grey Hunter replied. "The beacon as well." Borin closed his eyes briefly before nodding. "Then there is only one road left to us." Their plan changed in a matter of heartbeats. While the dwarves completed their work beneath the pillars, the Grey Hunter would enter the Black Vault alone, through a forgotten maintenance stair that opened behind the record chamber. His task was not to defeat its defenders, but to seize the parchments and destroy the beacon before the collapse reached the hall. If fortune favored him, confusion would delay pursuit long enough for everyone to escape through the hidden tunnel. If fortune failed, the mountain itself would become their final ally. No one spoke of sacrifice. None needed to. The concealed stair emerged behind towering shelves, crowded with sealed scrolls and carved tablets recording decades of Morgoth's secret war. The Grey Hunter moved between them without sound until he stood only a few strides from the central table. Scribes bent over fresh copies, unaware that another presence shared the chamber. The beacon stone glowed faintly upon its pedestal, crimson veins pulsing beneath its polished surface like embers hidden beneath ash. The hunter's hand settled upon the hilt of his knife as he measured the distance. There would be only one chance. He struck with the speed of a falling hawk. The first scribe collapsed before he could utter a cry, while the Grey Hunter swept the sealed parchments from the table into his cloak with his free hand. Turning in the same motion, he hurled his hunting knife directly into the beacon stone. Steel met black crystal with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. Crimson light flared violently before the stone shattered into 100 burning fragments, scattering across the floor like dying stars. For one stunned heartbeat, every soul in the black vault stood frozen. Then the alarms began. Orc horns roared from every gallery as soldiers rushed toward the record chamber. The corrupted captain seized a sword and pointed toward the Grey Hunter with furious certainty, shouting orders that vanished beneath the rising chaos. The hunter leaped across the table, overturning lamps as he passed. Oil spread across the floor, igniting scattered parchments before the nearest guards could stamp out the flames. Smoke billowed toward the ceiling, while scribes scrambled desperately to rescue records that curled into black ash before their eyes. Behind the growing fire, the Grey Hunter reached the hidden stair just as the mountain answered Borin's work. The first tremor rolled beneath the black vault with the deep voice of awakening stone. Dust poured from the ceiling in thick curtains, followed by a sound unlike anything the hunter had ever heard. It was not an explosion alone, but the slow, terrible failure of pillars that had borne impossible weight for too many years. Great cracks raced across the floor. Entire sections of the vaulted ceiling collapsed without warning, crushing shelves, soldiers, and blazing records beneath avalanches of rock. The corrupted captain disappeared beneath a falling arch before he could give another command, while the black-cloaked messenger vanished into a cloud of stone dust and shattered timber. The Grey Hunter raced through the hidden passage toward the foundations, where Borin and the others already struggled toward safety. Behind them, the black vault came apart piece by piece as ancient supports surrendered to gravity at last. More than once the tunnel shook so violently that everyone was thrown against the walls. Farin stumbled beneath a rain of broken stone, but Borin caught his arm before the collapsing floor could claim him. Together, they pressed onward while choking dust filled every breath. At last, a final thunderous crash echoed behind them, followed by sudden silence broken only by distant streams, finding new paths through ruined stone. They emerged from the concealed passage many hours later, beneath the open sky. Dawn had come while they struggled through the mountain, and cold wind swept across the northern hills, carrying a sound unlike any heard in Beleriand for generations. Far to the west, bright trumpets echoed across the land. Upon a distant ridge, the Grey Hunter caught sight of countless banners advancing beneath the morning sun, their white standards gleaming against the smoke-dark horizon. The host of the west had come at last, led by Eönwë into the beginning of the War of Wrath. Behind the mountains, unseen beneath shattered rock, the Iron Road had lost its heart before its hidden armies could awaken. In the months that followed, the Great War raged until Morgoth was utterly defeated, Angband was broken, and Beleriand itself was cast beneath the sea. Songs were later sung of mighty captains, of eagles soaring above the final battle, and of the overthrow of the dark enemy. Yet none spoke of the hidden refuge beneath the mountain or the dwarves who risked everything to undo the work forced from their own hands. Borin and the survivors vanished eastward toward the Blue Mountains, carrying freedom instead of chains for the first time in many years. The Grey Hunter returned at last to Círdan upon the Isle of Balar, placing the scorched remnants of Morgoth's sealed orders upon the shipwright's table without ceremony. Círdan looked from the blackened parchments to the weary ranger and understood that some victories passed unseen by history, though they shaped its course forever. No minstrel ever gave the Grey Hunter a place in the lays of the elder days, but because one forgotten hunter walked alone beneath the mountains, the servants of Morgoth never unleashed the full strength of the Iron Road. And when the first age finally ended, the world passed into the second with one shadow fewer than it might otherwise have borne. If you walk long enough through Tolkien's world, you begin to notice that the greatest victories are seldom won where the banners fly. Kings ride into songs because many eyes witness their courage, yet countless quieter deeds pass unseen beneath forests, inside forgotten towers, or deep under mountains where no minstrel ever stands. That is not an accident, but part of the world's design. Evil always believes that only great strength matters, that vast armies, towering fortresses, and fear can shape history forever. Yet again and again, it is patience, faithfulness, and the choice of a single person to continue walking when no one will remember the journey that changes what follows. You may also have noticed that the servants of darkness build by twisting what was once good. Morgoth does not create master craftsmen, he enslaves them. He does not discover hidden roads, he forces others to carve them. Even his greatest works depend upon stolen skill, stolen hope, and stolen labor. That is why his kingdoms can appear mighty while already carrying the seeds of their own ruin. Power built upon domination never truly possesses what it commands. The hands may obey, but the heart remembers freedom, and sooner or later, that memory finds a crack through which the light may enter. There is another truth running quietly beneath this tale, one found throughout the history of Middle-earth. Hope rarely arrives as certainty. Círdan could not know whether the host of the West would prevail. Bórin could not know whether his hidden passage would ever serve a purpose beyond preserving a desperate dream. The Grey Hunter could not know whether following a single messenger would matter against the immeasurable strength of Angband. They acted because the right path remained the right path, even when success seemed distant. In Tolkien's world, hope is not the belief that victory is guaranteed. It is the resolve to do what is just, while the ending still lies hidden beyond the next hill. Perhaps that is why stories like this belong so naturally beside the great events recorded in the histories. The War of Roth was fought by powers beyond the measure of ordinary people, yet even such a war leaves room for unnamed travelers, weary craftsmen, silent scouts and refugees carrying only enough courage to reach another sunrise. The fate of ages is shaped not only by those whose names fill the chronicles, but also by those whose choices never find their way into them. The small act and the great event are not rivals. Each depends upon the other, woven together until neither can be separated from the pattern as a whole. And so, when you return in your thoughts to that smoke-dark sky over the northern lands, where the long years of the First Age were drawing toward their end, you may picture more than armies gathering beyond the sea. You may remember a lone figure in a weathered grey cloak walking quietly along forgotten trails, while the wind carried the distant scent of Angband across the empty hills. No horn announced his passing, and no song preserved the sound of his footsteps. Yet somewhere beyond the western horizon, dawn was already beginning, and even before the first great banners appeared upon the shores of Beleriand, hope had started its journey through the silence.